Hello, good evening. This is National India News, and uh, today I am Anwarul Huda hosting this session. Today is the national today is Republic Day, and on the eve of Republic Day, we really want to understand the republic, how republic like India is, and we really want to understand the way we are going and the way we are flowing to discuss the current situation of Republic. We have with us Professor Afroz Alam. He is HOD of Maulana Azad National Urdu University, and with another guest is Dr. Ayaz Ahmed. He is also faculty at Local Law School, and with us Dr. Manisha Bangar. She is a political and social analyst. So we will
I,
be like opening our.
yeah, but I'd like to introduce 1 minute. I guess Ayaz, she is in Gujarati Law University right now.
I've shifted to Gujarat University, Karnavati University here in the United World School of Law.
Okay, and Professor Afroz is in the Department of Political Science.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And I'm
So
in School of Law.
yeah,
Yes.
yes, yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, that's really it's really nice meeting all of you. Thank you, Anwarul. Yeah.
Yeah. We will be like there's another guest, Professor Ratnam. Maybe we will be like we are just trying to take him into this conversation, and we are really trying to get him once we get hold of him. Like once we get connected, we will surely take him in the discussion. We'll be starting our conversation, and I really welcome you all. Thank you so much for joining this conversation. And yes, today, the current times, we are witnessing lot of protest, and in the past couple of years, we have seen so many people coming out in the street, wanting to reclaim the rights which Constitution ensures, which Constitution talks about. And today, after 7 decades of republic, we feel like we are in the dilemma that today are we really fully republic or not. Obviously we came on the street, we want to say whatever we want, but again there are laws which quickly just the police able to through the law, and the politicians able to arrest someone, detain someone, and put them behind the bars, and they left them, even if they are talking about the constitution, even if they are talking about the rights. To open this conversation, I would like to ask first question to Professor Afroz Alam, and this is like a very generic question, but still I want to ask you. You have been like a student of political science, then the professor of political science, and you have seen so many things in India. So my first question would be how you see, how you see these 7 decades of Indian Republic. What are your observations, sir? To you, sir.
See, and I have both the senses in me. A certain sense of pride and certain sense of tragic experience. The sense of pride lies in the fact that we are still a democracy. What we have achieved some around 7 decades before, we are still a democracy that many countries are not able to maintain and sustain. The tragic experience is that we that democracy is becoming threatened day by day. I'm not sure that what we have achieved 7 decades before, and we are still able to sustain it. Will we be able to sustain it any further or not? Because the threats to democracy is not from the visible sources. There are invisible threats. The issue is that the people who were conscious of for their rights, for their liberties, for their well-being, for the country's well-being, are getting seduced are getting seduced with the idea of the fact that they are losing their citizenship character. And that citizenship character itself is a challenge, that when we lose the idea of the idea of people rooted in citizenship is at threat. We are no longer able to assert our identity as one of the concerned citizen. And this is what we have seen over the years. We have achieved a lot in terms of economy, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of politics, in terms of many social and the cultural paradigms. But the point is that whatever we have achieved, will that be able to deliver things to the poorest section of the society or not, to the marginalized section of the society or not? What ought to be the character of India in coming 10 years? What ought to be the character of democracy in 10 years? The idea is that we have a constitution, and that constitution gives you every right. That constitution gives you a certain sense of entitlement that you can participate in the democratic process of the country as an equal citizen. But the idea of equality is at variance. It is being treated as convenience. It's not a convenience. So the point is that what are we going to achieve in coming future? Will there be any achievement, or will there be a maximum losses in the coming years? So the 70 years period was a period of transformations in multiple aspects, but those transformations were not always positive. Still, we dealt with it. And as a person, as a concerned citizen. But the whole idea is at stake: will we be able to do and claim our rights with a certain sense of dignity and entitlement in coming 10 days or not? So the India's achievement is its democracy. But the tragic point is, will we be able to claim it, because we are at the experience of noting down the rots at multiple level. That is what my point of view at the moment. Yes, Anwar sir.
Yes, you have mentioned a very interesting thing that in the past 7 decades, so much thing has happened. But the main concern is, will be able to claim all those rights with the dignity. So going ahead, taking this conversation ahead, I would just like to ask Dr. Ayaz Ahmed, that you heard Professor Afroz Alam. He talks about dignity, claiming all the rights, which which Constitution talks about with the dignity. My question to you would be like, we are seeing at the current times that people are talking about dissent and they are protesting. Even today, India has witnessed something which we had not seen, before, in our like, through our own eyes. But my question would be, but at the same time, we see that the people are putting behind the jails for allegedly cracking a joke, allegedly, doing a seditious things. So I would like to understand from you that Constitution definitely talks about freedom of expression, but it also gives the state, the power of the laws through which you can be put behind the bar without any questions. I'm referring to the laws which are understood as the seditious law, or sorry, seditions. So those laws. So I would like to understand that Constitution gives freedom of expression at one hand, and that the second hand, it gives power to the state to put any person behind the bar. So what is your understanding in this, the dilemma?
When it comes to freedoms, rights which are recognized under the Constitution, you also have certain reasonable restrictions which can be imposed. It is there in the text of the Constitution itself. But some of these laws that you have mentioned, the sedition law, the hurt sentiment, religious sentiment, the law under which Munawwar Farooqi has been booked behind the bars, these are not post-independence laws. Both the sedition law as well as Section 295A of Indian Penal Code, they are pre-constitutional laws. So the mechanism of the constitution was that pre-constitutional laws will not automatically repeal themselves. The constitution had maintained that pre-constitutional laws will continue to exist unless and until they are either repealed by the parliament or the competent legislature, or they are declared to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court or the High Court under Article 13, Clause 1. So this was the mechanism. And these assaults that we see on freedom of speech and expression, they are primarily under sedition law and Section 295A, hurt religious sentiment laws. They are pre-constitutional laws. So here the task was of the judiciary. It was for the high courts, for the Supreme Court to interpret pre-constitutional laws in the light of the democratizing sentiment which constitution has generated. Right. So these laws which were passed in a colonial circumstances by the colonial powers, and there was a specific context to it. Sedition law was very clearly to prevent any attempt to discredit the British government. That was the context behind sedition law. Section 24 of IPC. Similarly, Section 295A was again enacted by the British in the context of religious polarization, two poles which were getting created before constitution. Two kinds of nationalisms which were coming up, the Hindu nationalism and the Muslim nationalism. So Section 295A came in that context. And very interestingly, Section 95A, under which Munawwar Farooqi has been booked for cracking a joke or not being able to crack a joke on religions, was on the insistence of Muslims. So it was for the High Courts and Supreme Court to reinterpret those laws in the light of the democratic sentiment of the Constitution and declare them to be unconstitutional. But the courts did not do it. In fact, the overwhelming consensus of the High Courts and Supreme Court was and has been to remain very, very conservative, to continue with the mighty powers of the state which Britishers had created, so that certain sections who came to occupy power, who got powers from the British, we know Congress and who were part of the Congress. Once they got the power from the British, they continued to consolidate their powers, and Supreme Court in a way facilitated it. So you had concentration of power in few small caste groups. There was no overhauling or rupture, so to say, in my view, at the commencement of the Constitution. It was a task to be done. That's what Dr. Ambedkar emphasized so much, that we are entering a life of contradiction. We in our political life, we will have economic political equality, but in our social economic life, we will have inequality. So that was an unfinished task. After the commencement of the Constitution, it was the task of different institutions created under the Constitution to develop the sense of the people. There was no pre-existing sense of the people. It was to be constructed brick by brick under the provisions of the Constitution, with the spirit of the Constitution, to create we the people as one people, and along with it the unity and integrity of the country, ensuring the dignity of the individual. That task has not been sufficiently performed, and Congress party after independence, because it got the power from the British, major blame has to be shared by the Congress party. And that's how I see that despite Constitution being a democratic, liberal and egalitarian document, much of the fruits of Constitution have not percolated down, and the spirit of constitutionalism does not inform our public discourse as much as it should. Anwarul.
You rightly mentioned about the laws which were made. These are the laws which were made pre-independence, but yet state decided to continue with them and to hold that mighty power. Coming back to Dr. Manisha Bangar, there's this interesting point Dr. Ayaz Ahmed mentioned, but at the same time we see that there are another set of laws which are being made. Like recently, the government has passed, the central government has passed law like CAA, and talking about NRC and other laws. And recently, the state, some of the state government has passed anti-conversion laws, and primarily with the notion of love jihad. So how do you see this?
Uh, yeah, actually, the thing is, I was listening to the discussion, and I really feel that we need to understand the concept of what the nation is, what nationalism is, because all the laws that are being enacted with so-called quote unquote with the popular consent and consent of the people, as it is always said by the current government, these are bought in the background of a nationalistic fervor, and a nationalistic, and that too a religious nationalism is being exalted to. At the time of British, that time also there was a nationalism that was exhorted to. It was alluded to, and then later brought in the mainstream, in the forefront. That was the nationalism uh, of a colonized country trying to overthrow a foreign power. But after the British have left, then the rulers of this country definitely do not have that kind of a nationalism going on. Also, it can have a nationalism of other country versus our country only in times of war or in times of external skirmishes which happen with other neighboring countries. So, and that cannot be exalted, that cannot be literally ignited every now and then. Though we have seen it happening pretty frequently of late, but it's not something that can happen every day in, day in, out. And it is not something which will induce a kind of a constant nationalism within the people. Also, if it induces a kind of a external across the border nationalism, there's a significant amount of consequences that the ruling government in that particular country has to bear. The stock markets go down, there is less investment in the country, people feel it is unstabilized country, and then it literally has the effect on the privileges of the ruling class itself. So it's not definitely these things are not exalted, or the fervor is not maintained every time. It happens before the elections, or sometimes when the the idea of the people or the imagination of the people needs to be diverted to something else, or it has to, the people have to be defocused. That is the time it resorts to this kind of nationalism. But then the kind of nationalism, whether this kind of nationalism or the nationalism which was adhered to by Congress at that time, there's hardly any difference, because one cannot really say that Congress did not resort to religious nationalism. It did parallelly. All the tenets or fundamentals, as there was a Swaraj which was being asked for, as we were asking for a liberation or a kind of a independence, total independence. Earlier, it was a Dominion status that was requested for. Then there was a demand, and then they were literally fighting. We were literally fighting. Congress was in the leading front. And whereas this for political democracy, as things were being put in shape, parallelly, there was a religious nationalism which was being played out by Mr. Gandhi himself. We had the Hindu Mahasabha on the one hand, which was overtly religious and overtly having a religious nationalism under its glove. But then we also had Mr. Gandhi resorting to the same methods, and he exhorted to the same kind of a culture, whether it was cow culture or whether it was Ram, personification of Ram, and the magnification of Ram in everything. And under his platitudes of having a secular state or a secularism or Hindu-Muslim unity, you could see that Mr. Gandhi was precisely, absolutely, at no point in time I could find him deviating anywhere between the Hindu Mahasabha and the Congress own agenda itself. So that is how it has always been. Now coming to that, we need to go behind and see what was the idea of the nation makers, or those who were planning to or trying to build the nation at that time? What was their idea of nation? What was their idea of nationalism? And what was their idea of popular culture, which the ruling class exerts on the masses so as to take their consent to their own benefit, thereby meaning to keep its privileges intact. Now, nation as understood by Dr. Ambedkar and other people who were along with him, there were many minds which were in consonance with Dr. Ambedkar. We remember him because he was in the forefront of the constitution making. He was the chairman of the Constituent Assembly, and the constitution which we go by, a large part of the credit is given to him, and rightly so. So if that is the case, then Dr. Ambedkar's idea of nation was totally different as prescribed by or subscribed to by the Congress or today's BJP or the offshoot of Hindu Mahasabha, whether we take it in the organizational form or a political party form. Dr. Ambedkar's idea was of a nation. The thing which bound the nation was not something which is the geographical territory, or it is not something which is just ascribed a unity of various religions coming together across a particular mountain or surrounded by seas. It wasn't that. It was the sharing of respect. It was a mutual self-respect, a mutual fraternity. It was the sense of belonging to each other, thereby meaning that all the constituents of the nation feel that they cannot be without each other, that they need to belong to each other. They need to belong to each other. That sense of belonging, as occurs in one particular community, that has to be there across the people who are binding themselves together through these notions, through these values, the shared values. And then when such a community or such a people, whether bounded by geographical means or not bounded by geographical means, when they come together and they feel that now that they need to have a place of their own, and they need to stay in a particular place, and they need to have a particular geographical entity for themselves, they need to be there together, and they need to share their dreams, and their sharing of each other's sorrow is something which binds them. So this is the thing that makes a nation. And when these people, they all struggle, they all decide that now they want to have a place, then a nation state comes into picture. And when such a fervor, with this fervor, when they go and fight against an external colonizing army or enemy, that is where the nationalism comes into picture. So this is as you would see, that this is at the base of a nation state or the true nation. And if that is taken into consideration, then actually today in India, we are not a nation as yet. We are a conglomeration of caste, as Dr. Ambedkar has said earlier. And today we are absolutely, in groups which are having interests which are totally antithetical to each other, whether they are created or not created. But whatever it is still today a situation has come where there is a ruling class and there is a oppressed class, which is and there is some unity which is occurring within the oppressed class, whether you call it Bahujan or whether you call it a majority and versus minority or whatever. But then this is the entity which we are seeing in today's India. Now, without taking much time, I would like to identify 2-3 things which are very, very important. And if I may recall what Gramsci has said, especially about what he says is about the leading class. What he says is that the character and the behavior of the leading class is something which dictates whether it will be a nationalistic class or not. And here, mostly what happens is that the interest and the privileges of the leading class, they are somehow able to exert their hegemonical pressure in such a way that ultimately it becomes the nationalistic class. And I don't have to dilate the matter that actually this is what we see as to what the Congress did. Also, Dr. Ambedkar then further dilates, and as we understand that this particular popular leading class is the one who is responsible for the nationalism that a particular country, and especially today as we see in India, and this is what Dr. Ambedkar said, that it was responsible for the nationalism that we see today, that time as well as today. And this particular class is a Brahminical class, and this particular class is also the ruling class. So you can see now, and therefore he didn't want to differentiate between the Hindu Mahasabha or the leading class, popular class, or nationalistic class, whether religious nationalism class or whatever. He didn't want to differentiate between them, because he was saying that this particular class is together. And thirdly, he said, third thing which I feel identifies them is that the total disdainfulness, the total aggressiveness, the total exclusionist nature of this, totally both the kind of people, whether liberal or the mainstream orthodox nationalistic class that you take together, in keeping themselves detached from the masses and their aspiration and their interest. So this is what we've seen, diverging, totally taking them out of the mainstream or excluding them totally. So this is the background that we are seeing today. Then when we come again to last but not the least, that this particular exclusionist attitude which is there, it is increasing day by day, and this is exactly what we have seen in the institutions of this country. The judiciary, the way it is dominated, the media which is dominated, and even if the bureaucracy is supposed to be, according to the constitution, a rationalistic body of people, but the national body itself is subverted and hegemonized by the same popular leading class, which is the governing Brahminical class. So this is what it is. And Dr. Ambedkar again goes into saying that whereas in the other country, whether France or Japan, this particular class thinking about the larger interest of the nation, thought of giving up its privileges. But today when we again analyze that this particular class has done its maximum to retain its privileges, it has exercised all kind of pressure, state pressure on the oppressed class, and it has furthered it away, forget about giving any space to their aspirations, but even their constitutional rights have not been given to them. And there is no question of this particular class giving up its privileges at any cost. And that is the reason why today I'll give you a simple example. Today in farmers' protest, when we see that when the farmers are exercising their right to speak and right to demonstrate and protest, on one hand, definitely the BJP ruled government is totally against them. But then we see the liberal class, so-called, quote unquote, whether they are Congressis or whether they are, individual intellectual people, as they call them, or media people who could identify themselves as liberals, they are showing their uttermost disdain and uttermost antipathy towards this protesting people right here who are struggling for their constitutional rights. So I guess this is all that I want to say right now. Thank you.
ये वीडियो अगर आपको पसंद आया हो तो इसे लाइक करें, कमेंट करें, शेयर करें और हाँ, हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करना ना भूलें ताकि देश विदेश से जुड़ी खबरें आप मिस ना करें, क्योंकि कोरोना काल में 2 गज दूरी, मास्क है जरूरी। नमस्कार।